I call to order the Board of Education meeting of October 13th, 2020 at 7:00 p.m. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Again, I'll do a roll call of Board of Education members. Liz Flogel.
Here.
Nora Gatos.
Here.
Kathleen Holt.
Here.
Rachel Ruggieri.
Here.
Sean McAvoy.
Here.
Ken Schober.
Here.
Jonathan Steckler.
Here.
And myself. Okay, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website. Members of the public have the ability to watch this meeting through a live stream on our Board of Education website and YouTube channel. Regarding public comment will be submitted in writing through a link which is open and available on our Board of Education website as a pop-up. Rachel will open that now. It will be open from now until the point in our meeting where we get to the agenda portion, which is correspondence to the board. Written comments will be read aloud by Secretary Rachel Ruggieri. Okay, on to the next agenda item, chair reports. I think at our last meeting I mentioned our Board of Education retreat that we had on September 22nd and our work developing the start of a charter using Ruler as a framework. One of the outcomes of that work was a recognition that as a board we all bring different perspectives which need to be listened to and heard with empathy and value. And when conflict arises, we should respond calmly and respectfully, and when the discussion is over, to let it go and move forward. I think it's healthy for the productivity of the board to remind ourselves occasionally of these shared charter thoughts as we enter into our meetings together. This morning, a few members of the Board of Education, it was Sean, Rachel, Kathleen, Jonathan, and myself, walked through both middle schools and two of the elementary schools to see how the mitigation strategies have been implemented. We saw the challenges and the solutions and heard from the principals about the thought processes behind those strategies. Again, thank you to Joe Moritz, his staff and custodians, the principals and teachers and all building staff for all the incredible planning, problem solving, and execution to keep our kids safe in the schools. And to the technology teams for helping to keep our remote learners as part of the extended classroom. It was pretty amazing to see today. I know we'll talk a little bit more later. Next Monday on October 19th, early in the morning, I think at 7:15, we'll have a budget and finance meeting. We're looking to schedule a curriculum committee the first week of November. And we'll also try to get a policy committee meeting on the calendar. With that, I move on to the superintendent report.
Good evening, everyone. We hope everyone enjoyed the holiday and the long extended weekend. Welcome back. I wanted to start actually with a congratulations. I received a letter from the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education from the Executive Director, Robert Rader, and the Staff Associate for Professional Development and Communications, Lisa Steimer, congratulating Margaret Stamatis, who has earned the CAVES Certificated Board of Education member designation. According to the letter, very few other Connecticut Board of Education members have earned this prestigious honor, and this is really a reflection of the numerous CAVE and CAPS conventions, workshops, programs, and other events that Margaret has attended and contributed to. So, great accomplishment, congratulations. We're lucky to have Margaret as our board chair. Our pre-K through 5 students are all back in school, and as Ms. Stamatis just mentioned, we had an opportunity to visit some of them today, and besides being incredibly cute, they looked very happy. They were taking mask breaks, clearly enjoying school. We had also an opportunity to visit our middle schools, both middle schools this morning as well, and things are going very well and many successes to share. And there's no doubt that we did see some of the challenges in terms of spacing and things like that that made reopening fully challenging to do. But all those things being said, it was a good visit, and it was nice to be able to operationalize what we've been talking about in this board meeting for others, or help them visualize. And that's it for me.
Great, thank you. Liaison reports. I don't know if either Liz or Kathleen.
Well,
Stephanie.
Dr. DeSilva and I met virtually with the PTA board on the second of October. And it was mainly them asking just a lot of questions about the reopening plan and the 5-day in the elementary schools. And Dr. DeSilva handled all of the questions graciously and wonderfully. And it seemed like it was just, everybody just wanted to be informed so they could spread it out among the community members. I don't think there was anything else. It was really informative.
Generally speaking, yep. We had, some questions around the reopening of middle school, many of which we've had here at the Board of Education table, and just understanding that a little bit more. We hope the podcasts, that are helpful. They're oftentimes a follow-up on things that are discussed here, or quite frankly, when we hear questions from the community, if we see wide patterns, intentionally, that's why you might see some special guests on the podcast to help clarify and answer some of those questions in a broader way. So hopefully between PTA meetings, podcasts, and our communications Fridays, most of the questions can be answered.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to representative reports. I'd like to welcome the Ridgefield High School Student Government Secretary, Anna Vasconcelos, to provide tonight's student report. Welcome, Anna.
Hi everyone. So I'm here to report on what has been going on even in these crazy times from Ridgefield High School, trying to keep the spirit alive and kind of the morale of the students. So last week we had our first spirit bundles, we like to say, because both cohort A and cohort B can participate. They're 2 days in a row, in which we decorated the school in black and orange, and everyone wore Tiger Pride clothing. This week we are finalizing Spirit Week details. We had lots of limitations to Spirit Week this year, but we're trying our best to make it work for everyone and to keep up the RHS spirit and really have everyone enjoy the year, even though it is very different. We're in the midst of filming an exciting video in place of an in-person pep rally. And going along with that, we have a giant pumpkin at the high school right now in our student center for students to participate in a contest to guess how much it weighs. And for the winner of whoever guesses the correct amount wins Spirit Week points. And then the executive board at the high school has gotten involved in a new initiative run by the Anti-Defamation League called No Place for Hate. We're working to gain this accreditation for the school to be titled ADL, No Place for Hate Community. We are doing so by organizing anti-bullying events, creating ties between all of the school clubs, and having students sign a pledge to improve the school's social environment for the better. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Next report would be NEA-R. Steve Ruland, I think I see your panel. And not you. Steve, are you there?
Maybe not.
Maybe we can come back to you, Steve, if you're having problems logging in. We'll move on to the PTA report. Kim Carone.
So our PTAs have been very busy. Our Ridgefield PTA has organized a yummy food truck for teachers on the night of their open house, which was funded by family donations. Teachers enjoyed drinks and treats from Bubble and Brew. Branchville's PTA's main focus right now is their annual fun run, the Beaver Boogie. They've modified the event for this year to adhere to state and district health and safety protocols, and it will now take place during recess with students in their class cohorts. They're looking forward to being able to execute this beloved tradition with the help of the VEPS faculty and staff. And they'll be having their first general PTA meeting this Wednesday, and their families are looking forward to seeing Dr. De Silva there. If you've driven around the Farmingville part of town, I'm sure you've noticed the Can't Hide Our FBS Pride signs. The Farmingville PTA has been hard at work with this spirit-building fundraiser as a way to bring their FBS families together while they are apart. So far, the response has been overwhelming. And next week, FBS is hosting Kaleidoscope Garden Design as they facilitate outdoor garden workshops with connections to next-gen science standards. The Kaleidoscope group will be engaging students with observations, problems, and solutions, investigating, and so much more, while providing great appropriate lessons in the FBS gardens. And our VP PTA has been extremely busy this year. To welcome the students and teachers back to the building, they decorated the front and rear of the entrances to the schools with banners and balloons to get them excited about the new school year. They sponsored the Tasty Yolk food truck for teachers and staff to enjoy lunch as they prepared for students to walk through the doors. They even distributed welcome back gift cards to the teachers to help them set up their classrooms, and they provided snacks and refreshments for the teachers to make their virtual open house extra special. The VPPTA also approved a mini grant for students in grade 3 to 5 to have stadium-style seats that would give them more time during the day outside. And they're offering Halloween pumpkin crafts to students to help keep the season alive while not being permitted to hold their traditional Halloween festivities. They're offering 2 virtual enrichment classes from mid-October through November. And one would be Coding with Minecraft, hosted by the Happy Code Club, and Cooking with Kids Test Kitchen, hosted by VP's own 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Funk. They're hoping to keep students engaged outside of school with this new virtual format. And finally, VP's organizing their annual Spirit Run, which is being modified to ensure it's a safe and fun event for all their students. Our Ridgefield PTAs have been hard at work, and it's only the 2nd month of school. They're all going above and beyond to provide fun, engaging, and safe activities for students and teachers, and we can't wait to share more with the Board of Ed next month.
Thank you, Kim. I see Steve was able to get on, Steve Rowland with the NEA-R. I think you're on mute, Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear us? Oh, I'm on mute. All right, hang on. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right, I'd like to begin by thanking all of our students and parents for their continued patience and support over the last several weeks. It's been our students that motivate and inspire us during this unique and difficult time. As we settle into our hybrid model, we're slowly navigating the obstacles as they arrive. And as expected, our teachers have maintained high expectations of themselves and are working tirelessly to ensure the best possible learning under current conditions. On behalf of our membership, I'd like to thank Dr. De Silva and the Board of Education for allocating additional time to the teachers during the workday. We understand the value time holds for everyone involved in the education of our children, and we do sincerely appreciate the time and work involved in responding to our requests. And again, thank you. A special thank you also goes out to all our building administrators who've been very creative and supportive in managing building time and addressing our concerns in a timely manner. Just on a final note, I just would speak briefly on an issue that has been repeatedly brought up over the last few weeks in conversations that I and my colleagues have been having with colleagues and administration. It's an issue that I think many of us take for granted, and that issue is trust. The word trust has shown up daily in interactions with students right up through administration. We've successfully kept our exposures and outbreaks low due to the trust we place in each other. We trust that students will fulfill their academic obligations, that parents will continue to monitor their children for signs of illness, colleagues will continue to provide the best possible education, administrators will continue to ensure a safe environment, and that Dr. De Silva and the Board of Education will continue to hold the safety and well-being of our entire school community paramount above all else. We have exemplified the power of trust over the power of fear. I ask every member of the Ridgefield community to recognize the importance of trust and in working to maintain this bond. Through trust we have and will continue to overcome any obstacles. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, which is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion regarding the September 14th minutes?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the September 14th, 2020 regular board meeting.
Do I have a second? Sean? Any comments or changes?
I have some changes.
Okay.
I was not present that evening, so I need to be taken off the members present as well as in all the motions.
Cheryl, did you get that? Okay. Any other comments or changes? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please raise your hand. That's 7. All those opposed? All those abstaining? 1. Okay, so 7 in favor, 1 abstention. Thank you. Do I have a motion regarding the September 15th minutes?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the September 15th, 2020 special board meeting.
Do I have a second? Kathleen? Okay, any comments? Changes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the September 15th meeting minutes, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 8 of us. The motion passes. Thank you. All right, moving on to discussion items. I think we have a reopening update. Dr. De Silva?
We do. So we've come to the board and spoken about elementary, we've spoken about middle school, and here we are approaching the end of the quarter, and now it's time to speak to an update on the high school. And so I've asked Dr. Greenwood to lead the discussion today because he really is best to do so. He lives and breathes the school each and every day alongside his administration colleagues and his faculty. And so what you'll hear tonight is many of the successes, and some of the challenges, and where we are with next steps. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Greenwood.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak a little bit about the school and where we are. So I'm going to flip over to a quick slideshow to guide us through, hopefully. Okay. Aptly named. So I just want to take a moment and talk about some of our successes this year so far, because thankfully, working together with the board, we were able to make a number of changes pretty hastily over the summer in order to get things rolling. The hybrid schedule itself has been definitely, I would say, a success, by looking at the fact that we haven't had any positive cases at the high school, so for sure that across the district, but for sure at the high school, that was a step in the right direction to get the doors open for us. Mask compliance and health and safety protocols, have had 0 issues. So our students have exceeded expectations, lived up to the challenge, and come in every day with masks on, ready to go, no complaints, no problems, and so we're really proud of them and appreciate their continued support too. The arrival and dismissal has been nice. It's allowed students to comply with our request, essentially to have them in the building in cohorts, but also to give them access to extra help to seeing their teachers, because they have some time in the morning and in the afternoon. And also it's going to allow us, as we move forward, to start moving into clubs and activities too, and with that extra time. The block style schedule has been really nice for the teachers, especially with working with the technology. That they have that extra time to be sure that they're connecting with kids from home, because it is in a lot of senses, as you've heard, I've heard a few times the last couple of weeks, like running 2 classrooms at once, and so the extra time has been very helpful. Lunch service has worked out well. Students, we've followed a protocol, which I'll speak to in a moment in the Student Center. Parking has worked out well. I don't know if you remember, we opened up parking to all juniors and seniors right at the beginning of the school year. Not something we normally do, so that's been very helpful to allow us to have open campus so that kids can come and go when they have classes and not be on campus when they don't have classes. That help us with the total amount of kids in the building at any one time. Sports clubs and activities, I think, has definitely been a success, and again, I'd like to thank everyone here. I really appreciate your supporting us, especially as we moved into 7-on-7 for football, but getting all the sports off the ground. It's been really good emotionally for the kids to get back on those fields and get going. So, and clubs and activities are all set to go. Upperclassmen have already been meeting with their clubs. We're gonna have club fair coming up virtually in about another week, and fold our newest members of the high school family and our 9th graders, and really get moving with our clubs. So that seems to be going well. Our daily attendance is actually improved, likely because when students are homesick, now they're attending remotely. Where normally when you're homesick, now you're actually remote present. And Dr. Silver spoke about that in the last board meeting, some of the new attendance codes. But we averaged on this date last year, 3.2% of the student body being absent, or 1.6 today. So that's certainly again, that speaks to the technology and how well it's really worked. And again, thank you for supporting that initiative, which was the next one on there, so I kind of jumped over to the technology piece. And last, I definitely would want to, we'd do a good job if I didn't thank the staff for their adaptability through this whole thing. Everyone's been very, very flexible, students and staff alike, obviously the parents and community, but certainly the staff has really rolled with the punches, and so a lot of successes for the reopening. We certainly have had some challenges. None of what you see up here is new to us. We've known about these challenges since August, and so we've been working through them slowly. In terms of these challenges, when we decided to move to a hybrid schedule, because it cut the number of students in the building in half, these became a non-issue in a lot of ways. We're able to mitigate these. If we start talking about moving more children into the building, now we have to start really addressing these. We have some plans, and that's what I want to talk to next. But these are all areas that are not going to meet our social distancing guidelines as laid out by the town, based on the size and shape of the classrooms and or the class sizes. The number one and the largest concern we have is the student center, and I'll speak to that in a separate slide. The science classrooms would be probably our second biggest concern. They have fixed lab tables in them, except for a couple of classrooms in earth science. All the lab tables are fixed, meaning we can't move them. So I can't generate any space, I can't move furniture out and put smaller furniture in. So that's very prohibitive to running our lab program. The rest is a series of classrooms that I'll call them odd-shaped classrooms, so smaller classrooms or classrooms that run our elective courses, which do very specific things like ceramics, like fashion, which has kids using sewing machines. And so the social distancing, the more materials you put in the room, the smaller the room is before you even put a body in there. So those are concerns, ongoing concerns. And so some considerations looking at the student center as we talk about the possibility of bringing some more students in. Number one is we I believe, exhausted the idea of not offering lunch and have found out many different ways that we have to offer lunch. So to just say we're not going to have lunch was not an option, just throwing it out there. I know there was like school ends at 2, they'll be fine. So that's just not going to float. So I tried that one. We have a current concern over the size of the tables. I'll show you a photo in a second. Based on the size of the tables, we're pretty much right where we can be with 2 students to a table, and that also was validated by having the town health director in on a couple of occasions, and he said no more than 2 at a table. So if we looked at adding something like in the order of 50 to 60 students, I mean, I think it's important to understand if you add 50 students, to use that number, it's easier because we have 4 lunch waves. That's 15 students to each lunch wave. That's 7 more tables. I have every single table I can fit in there by the current social distancing guidelines. I have 91 tables in there. I can't put 92. So, just to add 50 kids means I already have to move to an alternate space for lunch. So right off the bat, you're taking something offline, something like perhaps you're taking the Ox Gym offline, you're taking the Black Box Theater offline. It's the only possibility that we have. And also we could talk about looking at segregating lunch into various spaces around the room. We could run an open space audit, which means you look at all the rooms that aren't being used a particular period and say, first lunch wave we're going to use these 5 classrooms, second lunch wave we're going to use these 5 classrooms. And one of the things that's really on my mind, especially as coming out of being out in the spring and moving into the fall, is the social and emotional impact this has on kids. In other words, so you heard one of our students, you saw Anna talk about the pumpkin in the student center, and we sort of laugh about it, but anything we can do to kind of keep the kids moving forward. So for instance, if you're in this cohort now that has to eat in the classroom for 2 days, you're not allowed in the student center at all. So you're going to miss out on school activities just by de facto of the way that we would be moving the kids around the building just to feed them. So it's definitely on my mind. I don't think it's trivial at all for us at this juncture. And a grab-and-go option is something that we tried on Friday, meaning that you could come into the cafeteria, get some food options, and then bring them elsewhere. So we are able to do that. So we've talked a lot about what we could be doing with Student Center as we potentially move more students in. Just a quick photo. I'll give you a second to orient yourself. I should have seen if there was a way to do a pointer before we got to this point. Yeah. So this is, the fire marshal says you have to have this hallway, so I can't put tables in there just to kind of point you to where this is. These tables are at the closest distance we can on having the kids back to back. They're at about 4 feet apart. So I can only have 2 kids at a table. So this is what a regular lunch wave looks like now. You can see virtually every table. This one here doesn't have students at it. And there's one there that the kid's about to sit down. There's one missing, but this is a full cafeteria right here. This is how we're functioning right now. So I literally don't have any more space to put any more tables in here to build any more capacity for seating as we bring more students into the building. Over here, if there's a sort of a twisted wave-shaped wall. We have desks all around there and tables that lead all the way out into the business section. So we've added seating as much as we can put in for the fire marshal all the way around the student center also. So I just wanted to kind of give you that visual of what we're looking like now, and this is what we're being allowed to do. with our current social distancing guidelines. It's probably important to say. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So if we start talking about a full return, I think that's something that's on people's mind. Here's our considerations if we're looking at a full return. So thinking just about the student center, just about feeding the students, using the student center itself, obviously, you can tell that's problematic, and starting to take classrooms offline is going to affect programming. So one of the things that we've looked at is maybe doing a half-day schedule, so we wouldn't have to use the student center at all. And that might look something like this. This is just a draft, something I worked on with a group of teachers and administrators who are kind of working through this, but this is an idea, just an idea. But you can see you take your current 4-period schedule and you have the kids until 11:30, dismiss before lunch. So if you dismiss them before lunch, you don't need the student center. And then the 4th period would be remote, and then we would rotate this schedule around so you wouldn't have the same remote period every day. Now, there's obviously some considerations with doing something like this, and so I'll bring you back here. The first off to think about is just, do we want all of our kids leaving the building at 11:30 every day? As a parent of a 16-year-old, I'll start by saying, I'd have to think about that some more, but I'm giving you some options here. We're just thinking things through. The second is, admittedly, athletics, clubs, and activities. Now everybody's home, you got to turn and bring them all back. So many of our clubs and activities are occurring online, not all. Robotics, some drama, music, choir, we're letting them back in the building in limited capacity. Athletics, obviously they're back in the building. So you got to turn around as a parent and figure out a way to get your kid back. Likely they're going to get rides with neighbors and other kids. I don't know if we've kind of blown our social distancing out of the water at that point. Again, just throwing some ideas out. We could allow some students who don't have rides back to stay. Then I've got to figure out supervision on where I'm going to put them, and then again, of course, I have to feed them. So again, just something a consideration. And full return students are still in 2 cohorts. One of the things that I really want to press upon everyone is that teachers are still going to have remote students. We don't know how many exactly are going to stay remote. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe more will go remote. But the teacher's still teaching 2 classrooms at the same time. So it's not business as usual, I guess is what I like to say. Saying they're coming back full is not really full, and we know that. So just keeping that on our mind. Extreme bottlenecking during dismissals and passing time. The new section that they built, particularly over in the F and G wing, the hallways are extremely, extremely tight. It must have been an educational design in the early 2000s. But the hallways are very, very tight. And so I don't know that we're going to have an issue with the kids passing by each other. I don't think that the duration of time, really causes the problem. It's the stairwells more than anything. And as you move through the stairwells, we would probably be looking at some one-way stairways and one-way hallways in order to divert the kids certain directions. And again, when we get to these one-way hallways and directions, my son's at a school that's doing that, and he complains anyways because he's in high school, but complains mercilessly about the one-way hallways. And I go back to this social-emotional piece, I don't want to lose sight of it, that I'm going to need supervision out there, telling the kids what direction they can walk. You can already hear the kids saying, oh, my class is right below me, and you're saying, no, but you got to walk down there and go down that and then back around. And so admittedly, the truth is they're high school students, so the more rules we're putting on them, the greater the chance that we're decreasing the overall morale, and also increasing negative behaviors. Their high school kids are probably going to start fighting against it to a degree. But something that we'd have to, again, it's a consideration, something to keep in mind. And then the idea of moving from low to medium to high and back and forth, multiple schedules could be challenging as we go into the winter months because, we don't really know what tomorrow and the next day holds in terms of what our risk level is going to be. So if we're moving towards multiple schedules, I'm worried about losing instructional time because each time, if one schedule is rotating and others aren't, you can be losing periods. You got to keep that in mind. Parking. Again, not insurmountable, just a consideration. We oversold the lot. We sold the lot based on the fact we wanted every kid to be able to drive because we're on a hybrid schedule, not only half the school's there every day. As you know, we don't have enough parking for every junior and senior. We've already oversold the lots. We'll have to park them somewhere else if we go to full. We'll have to figure that out. Maybe there'll be parking in my spot. That's fine. But it is a reality that we have oversold the lots, and again, something for us to worry about. We looked at the schedule briefly already. Something else that we've been tossing around is this idea of bringing back students, assuming that the social distancing constraints are not going to change in the near future, in the next 2 weeks before the quarter ends. Then we could look at, and the classroom sizes themselves aren't going to change. That's definitely not changing in the next 2 weeks. We could look at a gradual increase in our population size. And so we've been toying around with types of populations that we could use in order to bring some kids back who might need some support. So we looked at our special ed and 504 populations, students in specialized programs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I only offer this so you can see sort of the background. So we've already gone through all of the different courses and looked at if we added in cohorts A and B with special education and 504 students, what the impact would be on our class sizes. We take that class size impact and bring it over to the classrooms that we know are impacted by size and see physically how many of them now we have to move those classrooms in order to bring these kids back. So just wanted to kind of throw this out there to say we've done this work already, so it's on our mind. We also talked about looking at our failures and incompletes from last year. As you know, in the spring, we weren't 100% successful in getting all of our students through. We've got about 120 kids with various plans right now for credit recovery from the spring last year. Some of those kids would probably definitely benefit by having them back in 5 days right now so we can kind of get our hooks on them and get their credits back to where they need to be. Some of them are seniors. Those are obviously the most dire. Attendance concerns. So though our current daily attendance is great, it's still 1.6, of our kids are not attending all the time. So we looked at some spreadsheets. I didn't include obviously the second and third bullet because of confidentiality. We have those spreadsheets, but attendance concerns versus current grade versus students who didn't meet the credit requirements last spring. And we have a list of students right there that we know probably should cut off for 5 days too. Teacher recommendations. So we've been looking at all of the data. This is a 3-year look at the data of exactly where every discipline is and amounts of A's, B's, C's, and D's over the past 3 years at this point in time. So identifying by department, academically, how are our students doing right now in the hybrid model? And are there departments we could identify as students in there might need more support? A quick glance can give you a look at something like this, if I can do the right one quickly.
Dr. Greenwood, could you just make it a little bit bigger for the folks in the back, maybe? I'm not
Maybe.
sure if they can.
Well, imagine I was going to do that, Dr. Silva. What would you click on?
Bottom right corner should be Zoom.
I would have done something
All
different,
the way
so,
down.
yep,
Here?
yep, up a little bit more.
I can't see
I would
them,
want
so
it.
I feel bad.
That's all right.
We're fine. I'll talk faster and skip over this. My point is, we're looking at this line right here that's much taller than all the others. Here's a department that might be in need, students might be in need of support in that department. So my point is, we're looking at the current data to identify students we might want to bring back. So that's what I want to show. And then of course we have our SRBI process at the high school. We call it CIT, that's Child Intervention Team. It's our SRBI process. We currently have 19 students already in the pipeline, as we know, in need of support, non-identified, not special education students, but in need of interventions more than the teacher's giving in the classroom, and we're already working with them. Some of those students might come back. So I just want to throw out, if we look at a gradual increase in population, things we might look at. Last slide, I promise. So some likely scenarios if we're going to increase the daily student population, whether we're just increasing the population or looking towards a full return. The extent to which the scenarios are implemented is a direct relationship to the number of students. So based on the number of students we're going to bring back, that has an impact on these bullets that are here. Again, I'll move through them and then you can ask some questions. First off, we have to understand that students in classrooms are going to be at 3 feet apart. So we have large humans at a high school, they're going to be 3 feet apart. They're not going to be 5 to 6 feet apart. We have to make that assumption as we start bringing more kids back. I know we've already done that at the elementary, but it's a valid point to put up. A modified daily schedule, we may have to look at that. I showed you an example of one, but that may be something. To bring more kids back, might not be able to run the same schedule that we're doing right now. And again, how do we feel about having the kids leaving at 11:30 every day? Split and modified schedules for certain special areas means something like your fashion class can't happen in its classroom because of the numbers of kids in there. So I can only have half the kids in the classroom, have half remote somewhere else in the building like the library, and then switch them halfway through the period. So physically displacing some sort of the curriculum in order to run the class. Potential remote only classes. So we've done some class size analyses. So here's all of the, oh, it'd be too small again, but pretend it's not too small. But here's all the classrooms that we know are issues. Here's all the notes we've taken about it. These are all the class sizes. These are all the potential other spaces we could put these classes. So we've gone through and looked at all other places we could put them. These all that say no, it says alternate room available, but that's because it's something like culinary or science. You just can't do it somewhere else. It's not going to happen. So those are going to have to move to probably a virtual scenario. So potential remote-only classes for specials. That's a possibility if we were to bring for sure the whole school back, and science labs too. As we increase the numbers of students in the science, the health director was really clear. We'd have to use our fixed lab tables as regular classroom seats. Once you're using them as regular classroom seats, you're not doing labs at those stations. So it would be trading off increased enrollment for the ability to do labs in science. Modified PE schedules, because we'd be taking the gym and ox gym off. Again, at 50 or 60 kids, you're looking at the black box at 100 to 150 an ox gym. And then more students than that, we're probably going to be using the bleachers in the gymnasium, perhaps even while gym classes are going on. And so we would have to modify how we're doing PE. Limitations on group work and collaboration. That's the sort of the adage that I did before. It's not business as usual, meaning that the more students you have in the classrooms, the less collaboration there's a chance for. Right now with the spacing, there's some turn and talk, there's dialogue, but the more bodies are in the room, the less we're going to need to allow those bodies to move their big bodies at 3 feet apart. And the last that's on here is the inability to fully implement programming and learning activities. I think it's really important to understand the more kids you bring in, the more you constrict our ability to do things like, and probably the biggest one on there would be science labs. It really gets really challenging if bodies are at them as tables. How are you going to run an actual lab in that same area? But also cooking classes, sewing, coming out of forensic, ceramics, and gym. So those all become really challenging for us. I think that was my last slide, was on questions. Go ahead.
So what's the biggest challenge to staying in our current model? To using the adage, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, so we have a population of students that I would like to invite back. I think we can take on some size pretty safely right now. As the quarter ends, we could use the parameters I had thrown up there. Let's leave it up there since we're talking, and use these parameters to come up with a group of students that we would invite back to the building and see how it goes. That's probably the best thing to do, assuming that we don't want to start looking at changing our programming, which worries me because I think we have a pretty amazing programming and we're moving through it now. And also assuming the social distancing guidelines are not going to change in the next 2 weeks. To me, I think the best move is to help some students who might be struggling and get them back into the building.
Right, and I completely agree with that. So
Yeah.
then so then we leave it like this. So the population that needs that extra help.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation today. Yeah.
And then so then moving forward, continuing, so modified hybrid, we'll call it.
Correct.
As opposed to full-time, everybody back in the building.
Right, because as soon as you go to full-time, there's a reality to flipping back over to this slide, you're going to be giving up programming because you'll just need the space to do some very fundamental things like feed the children. Just because of the way the building's set up.
Although, Ken, what I would add, though, is even with bringing back in students, we'll never be able to bring back every student who would benefit from, based on what Dr. Greenwell has described, who would benefit from coming back 5 days. We would still have to make some modifications to what the experience is even right now. So we would bring our high priority kids without a doubt, but it wouldn't be all of the kids that would benefit. Different than, let's say, the middle schools where we were able to invite all of our students with IEPs back. Right now, at the high school, it doesn't look like we would be able to do that without having some modification to at least some of the programming that students are experiencing, whether that's in the elective area or perhaps the lab area. But certainly we would be able to bring back more. So layer it, and then hopefully with time, if the social distancing rules change, layer again, allowing for more.
Because that was just, as I was listening to a lot of the challenges were coming up as every student back. And so I think the challenges are less with, obviously, if the population that's coming back is less.
Well, and I think there's a significant population that wants to remain hybrid
Yeah.
for their own reasons. And maybe a poll of those to classify it, and, I mean, I'm in the cheap seat, so it's hard to see the graphs, but
That was my move.
it's obvious that you've done the data analysis, which is important. But if we could classify those that say, hey, no matter what, we're staying hybrid, or we're gonna stay remote 100%, there's gonna be a population of that, and it may help you make different decisions.
And we talked a lot about that. I just wanted to be perfectly honest that I was meeting on Dr. Silva to let me do this presentation first. We sure the community knew what they're up against before we did any more surveying. Just I thought it would be good to be on,
Yeah,
have the transparency first. So I
there's some
think-
survey fatigue, no question.
Yeah.
So I just have a question about the identified population, just a clarifying question. So on that other slide, you had, you talked about seniors who need credits, which obviously makes a lot of sense, IEPs, and special ed and 504s. What about freshmen who are struggling? Because if we don't have the 1920 completes, and I wonder, with that population being new, that's just on teacher recommendation?
Yeah, that's a teacher recommendation piece. That's by department, not by age of student.
Okay.
And admittedly, some of our departments are having a little bit tougher time getting the curriculum across because of the spring.
Yeah,
They didn't get as far in math as they would have liked.
yeah,
And so we have some students that I think would be benefit coming back largely around their math course.
okay.
Yep, and those are all 9 through 12.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any consideration to bringing like a full grade back, like for example, seniors in the fall because it's their last year, or juniors next spring because that's a super important time period?
Yeah. So we threw it around the teacher committee around how to bring it back. We thought first would be to go through our most at-need population and see what that number comes out to. We haven't really sat down and said this equals 50 kids or 500 kids, and then take a look at what that number looks like. So we thought this was the most important place to start, but I could probably be swayed a different direction. But this is how we thought first was those most in need of some intervention right now.
You don't know how many this slide represents?
I don't know if I were to go through all of these. I mean, just alone, we wouldn't be able to offer it to all, for instance, special education to 504 students. And frankly, at the high school level, many of them are doing very well. That's the beauty of moving through the progression. So I really don't know. I know that in order to look at numbers of spaces to take offline, at 50 to 60 kids, up to 150, we at least would need 2 large spaces just around feeding them. So we'd probably be looking in that range to give it a start.
I have a little bit of a tangential question, but we're related to coming back. So a lot of the teacher recommendations are on academic performance. Have we considered the mental health implications of these kids? I mean, obviously there's neighboring communities that are being pretty dramatically impacted, and personal, families and friends and relatives of our own. I'm sure everybody on the YouTube and everybody. Is that a consideration as well, and how is that being handled?
Yeah, these students on the bottom, this 19 students through our CIT, at the high school level, our SRDI and CIT is largely around exactly what you're talking about, the social emotional health, because we have so many academic ways that we're cataloging students, for lack of a better word, with PowerSchool, the numbers of grades. That piece is easy. These 19 students at the bottom represent some pretty special cases of why they're not performing well. So absolutely, and that's where we capture them.
Well, what about the kids who are maybe performing adequately, but because their social emotional needs aren't being met, aren't at their peak or their most effective?
Yeah, so it's a continual process, and I wouldn't look at it as an endpoint if we were to bring some students back. I think the goal would be as many as we possibly can and still feel comfortable in not affecting programming and adhering to our social distancing. So I think, as Dr. Silver was saying, I think we just keep layering the pieces on as more information comes forward. We wouldn't leave any stone unturned that we know of, but things are gonna materialize as the year goes on, and we'll continue to keep working. We may have students moving the other direction too. We may bring more kids back and have some kids who say, you know, I'm not comfortable anymore, but that gives us some more space to bring some more in.
I think the other element is that the population that I think you're describing, Liz, and I think you're describing, Ken, sometimes other kids that are doing okay academically, they're incredibly bright, can access easily, but yet on the emotional side, they need that social interaction. They thrive on social interaction, they thrive on that access, and being really in tune, and I know later we're having a discussion around mental health supports across our schools, in particular at the high school, when you're leaning in onto all of those folks, whether it's your SROs, your school psychologists, your counselors, those individuals, and the teachers, you have to pay attention because they're not the obvious, right? And we know that they're not the obvious. And so how we do that, especially when on paper, in Power School, they're doing fine, right?
That's exactly where I was going.
How we determine fine, right? But there's a whole other element to fine, and I think, you know, just given this past week and it being around mental health awareness, right, is that it's tricky to spot. And so we do have to rely on all of our educators to really be in tune to kids that may be looking different, may be accessing differently, and quite frankly, our families as well. And tuning us into what they may be seeing at home, that we need to figure out, and whether or not that's bringing them back 5 days, whether that's bringing them, providing supports in some way. You know, I would say that that is the hard population to find when it's not in your face.
Yeah, I think just one point on that, it's not just about the academic experience either. It's, as this goes on, more and more losses, right? Lots of looking forward to something, you know, seniors looking forward to things, even freshmen, first dances, football games, all of the things that they don't get to experience. And I think as this goes on, the risk starts to raise even higher than it is right now.
And I appreciate you saying that. I think I had social emotional on just about every slide, because it's really on our minds to, you know, keeping our eyes and ears open all the time. And, you know, every little thing that we do, you know, it could seem so simple as, well, just now we're gonna tell kids to use that hallway versus another one. It really, it starts wearing them down.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you bringing that up.
I think it does at every level, but there is something about the high school experience, that rite of passage, whether you're in ninth, whether you're in 12th, it's that rite of passage. And so, and Jake and I spoke about this a lot today, is the more and more that you can find, which we would be in a position that we would have to do. We'd have to establish more rules, right? There's not a lot of places to move when there's only one classroom and there's only so much space. And what that feels like for a student at that age level, it feels difficult for the student at this age level too. But certainly I think when you're at that level, and you're accustomed to having this independence and this ability to move around, and all of a sudden that's taken away. And the biggest challenge, and we've discussed this a lot, about what this would mean for our kids if we were actually able to bring them back, health and safety wise, and could figure it out, is it quantity over quality?
Yeah.
And I think the long and the short of it is we kept coming back to that question, is this about the number of days more than the experience? And if it's about days and then we've lost everything that we wanted to gain with the experience, we're not sure that we've achieved anything.
That's good.
The home for lunch idea, I know it comes with a whole list of its own issues. How many more students does that get into the building? How many more students get to be at school 5 days a week under that scenario?
If we were released at 11:30?
Yeah.
I mean, to do something like that, we would be looking at pushing towards full capacity probably.
So a
Because
lot
that's
of
a
those,
pretty drastic schedule.
right,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's easy to do that tomorrow, but that would get to the students that are on paper looking like they're doing okay, but maybe not doing as well as
I
they
think
appear.
the one piece with that experience, sorry Dr. Greenwood, is that I don't think it was in, it was if this, then you could do that. I believe even with the shortened schedule,
Program.
there would still be challenges with the programming, right? Because you're still gonna have electives, they're just gonna be earlier in the day
That's right.
versus later. So initially, that draft plan seemed ideal, because, at least from my point of view, I thought, okay, they're getting in for the, 5 days for a good portion of the day. They get to go home, they still have the remote experience, they'll figure a way to get back just like they do on the other opposite days, right? If they're coming in 2 days, they have to figure out how to get back for athletics or clubs anyway. But when we started talking about, okay, let's just play out these numbers, if we still got the population that we would anticipate we would get back fully, we would still have to impact programming for those labs, the arts, and the electives. So it wouldn't really change that, other than the lunch, it solves for the lunch, which is another significant variable. And the other point that I'll bring up, that I know that it's just the natural, and in fact, Ms. Donatis and I were talking about it earlier, is how many other school districts are bringing their kids back, right? You can't help but wonder, like, okay, what are our neighbors doing? And some of our neighbors have been able to bring back their students. I can't weigh in on what the quality is, or what the value is, or even what their community wants, right? So it's a community effort as well. But I would say that the one piece that we have to consider is the size of our high school, in what our building looks like, right? The number of our students and our building. And so those variables are what we're not able to see when we don't live in a community. Do they have 2,000 kids? Do they have 900? Is their building bigger, wider, grander, and our building not? Or is it, So I think that's one piece that we just have to consider, and most high schools are not that, because they're in the same situation that we are. But for those that are, it could be a community-driven or a school-based decision based on the dynamics that they have, that we don't necessarily have.
I know it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, but is there any flexibility with the Stearns buildings being so close that we could use the gym for lunch or something to alleviate some of this, or? I mean, I don't know if it's one of those things, but.
I want my colleagues to take the visit today.
They're already a little tight.
They're tight.
Especially
I'm
as
not able
our,
to make the tour today, but.
but good thought.
Yes, it is actually, Liz, though, just to add, one of our conversations at one point was literally switching buildings. You weren't on that call, Dr. Lee. I'll say you were in pain from that call, but there was. We actually, for a minute, thought, like, is there a possibility to do some swapping?
Yeah.
Even, or bring some classes down, and we just couldn't do it.
Or basket.
1 point for creativity. Ken.
From a lunch perspective, is there some way of utilizing outdoor space? Because, I mean, every restaurant in town's had to do it.
Yeah,
Even right outside the current area, I know from the couple times I visited the school, there are interior courtyards that are not being used at all, like for anything.
Yeah, so we have 4 beautiful tents, and actually a couple more that we can put up that have sides. And so Joe's gonna work with us as the temperature begins to drop. We're gonna put the sides on, and he's even talked about figuring out some way to either sort of like daisy chain them to the building, or figure out ways to get some heat in there that you can turn off while the kids are in there and they're back on to keep them warm. So we're gonna continue to use those spaces as long as we can, and maybe even add a few more. So it's going to continue to help with kids who love, it's amazing to watch how much they love being outdoors. I think they didn't realize how much they like to be outdoors about the building, and now they're out there all the time, so it's actually really nice to see.
Are we using those? I know there's at least the one interior courtyard.
There's 4 tents up in 2 separate spaces, and they're used virtually every period.
Nice. Okay, perfect.
All the schools we visited today, the courtyards have.
Yeah. Good to know.
So it seems like it's an impossible scenario to bring them all back. I mean, it just is very clear at this point.
Without affecting programming.
Without affecting programming,
We can't do it
And
at this juncture.
risking people's health,
That's.
which is our paramount.
Well, and I asked earlier today, and I'll ask again, Susie, do you foresee any change in the state's guidance? We're at phase 3 on restaurants. They have increased capabilities.
So we have a call with Ed every Friday, Ed Briggs every Friday, and I actually done a different call with him today. I asked the same question 1,000 different ways. People have learned that about me. It's really the same question. I just asked it differently. But the answer is right now he doesn't expect that. And so for us, that is the variable. You say you can go to 2 feet or 1.5 feet, we're back in school. What I didn't hear Dr. Greenwood talk about, though, tonight is that there is an element of when kids come back full, let's just say all these other pieces worked out, and there is a COVID case at the high school, what that means in terms of students, if we did have to quarantine, the number of students that would now be impacted, right? Just sheer number, you have double the kids, so instead of having 12 on quarantine, you're going to have 24 or 25 across however many classes happen to be impacted. So there is that element as well. We didn't talk about it because ultimately if we brought kids back, it's because we were able to do so safely. We wouldn't put ourselves in the position of the Board of Education or our kids, most importantly, if we didn't feel that way, that we could bring them back. And that's really been at the forefront of our mind, regardless of our visit with the health director, is it safe to bring them back? What is this going to feel like when we bring them back? And even though we had our opinions, obviously, we confirmed that with our health director. In some of those spaces, it's very obvious, no different than when we walked through our middle schools today. It was very clear, even with half the kids, and in particular at Scottsbridge, it was a smaller cohort, it feels very full in those spaces when the space is small. You can realize that kids can't navigate, if you even added 3 or 4 kids, the experience is different.
Other board questions, comments? Before we move to the next agenda item, is there anything else, Dr. DeSilva or Dr. Greenwood, you'd like us to discuss as a board that would kind of help you in terms of guidance or decision-making or?
I don't think, I mean, I would just say, I just want to make sure I put on record that your children have been amazing. And I just can't speak enough. I'm happy to be back. But they've been, these children, they don't know me, many of the teachers do, but they've been beyond perfect. And so I want to thank everybody for that. You sent us, wonderful kids, and they've lived up to our expectations and made this something that we can talk about and get through. So I just want to make sure I thank everybody.
Yeah, and I would say, just to echo that, in pre-K all the way up, I mean, you could just see how serious the kids have taken this responsibility. They're used to it. It's what we thought would have been really problematic is just not, right? I think with all the discussions we've had around masks and kids wearing them and how much do we need and all of the rest, the kids have really just taken on this new thing with leadership and a sense of understanding and how important it is for them to be able to stay in school. And it has limited the amount of disruptions and all the other things that we thought we would have to navigate. So we're very, very fortunate to have our kids here in Ridgefield just doing the right thing.
Thank you, Dr. Greenwood.
Thank you.
So if you want to exit out of
Oh,
this, Jake, and if you want to go home,
Oh,
get
yeah.
up early tomorrow,
Okay.
this might be the time to do it.
Just tell me, this one?
There you
Yeah,
go.
here we go. Good.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, which is Legislative Bill Senate 4360. I believe Dr. DeSilva provided us with a memo regarding some information specifically framed around the language of the bill. Dr. DeSilva, if you want to take us through
So I'll
some
speak
of
to
that.
it just for a minute. So I included a memo, because as I read the bill, and I know it's a discussion at the board level, but as I read the bill, I couldn't help but being struck by a distinction between practitioners that support the mental health of our students and perhaps in this particular case, police presence in schools. And so I felt it was important to help frame the conversation that you'll all have at the board level to understand that all of these individuals come together to support our students, regardless of their role. There isn't a teacher, a principal, a psychologist. Yes, we have folks that are specifically trained, and Dr. Hanaway's here if you want to ask for questions about the pupil personnel staff and how they've been trained. But certainly all of these individuals have a responsibility. I have a responsibility, the school-based administrators have the responsibility, and we talked a little bit ago about just even the responsibility of classroom teachers to be really in tune to their kids. And so from my point of view, I do believe we're well-staffed, and the reason I think we're well-staffed is because we have diversity in the resources that are available. We have resources that are from home to school. We have resources that are available 24/7, in particular at the secondary level when that's incredibly needed. And we have our school resource officers that have training that supports the mental health of adolescents as well. So, I just felt like that would frame the conversation of what our schools do look like and how very fortunate we are in Ridgefield to have a community effort towards supporting the mental health of children. We've also included the Senate bill for those of you that want to see it forward.
And Dr. De Silva, if I remember a couple of weeks ago, you said clearly that Ridgefield receives no federal funding for the school resource officers?
No, we do not.
Okay.
I'll open it up to board comments.
I have comments. So a couple of things. First, Mr. Murphy, who wrote the bill, represents Connecticut, as do all of us as elected board members. We should make it publicly known our stance on the community partnerships that we have, which are so valuable to our community. Even earlier today, in this meeting, we referenced the importance of the SROs. I can't imagine some of the other resources managing the traffic or managing the security at an event for our schools, which we rely on our partnerships with the police officers. Whether or not we quote-unquote receive federal funding is irrelevant to this bill. As some town media and even Ms. Holt has referenced, that we should not take a stance just because we don't get federal funding, even though Section 5A says we can't use any money if we do this. So the way it's written is very vague in terms of what this could potentially do. And look, we rely on our local police partnership for practical and local community security, positive law enforcement relationships, as well as building the community of our very safe small town, which we all live here and appreciate and love. Even if the bill does nothing to our funding, we as a board, as elected officials who support this partnership that's critical for our students, our faculty, the parents, and the overall community, we should make a statement of support about the police, our SROs, and other law enforcement officers that support all of our community, including our students and schools. I believe that our stance should also include that we are a local school district, and this bill is just one of many that starts to degrade the value of a local board of education and the value of local control of schools. We should make our decisions based on our trends and our community and our needs, just like every other school district should around the nation, not as things that are dictated by Washington, D.C., who knows nothing about Ridgefield. And Ridgefield's needs is very different than what a community may need in California or Idaho or anywhere else. So with that, I say, whether or not this impacts our federal funding, we as an elected board have an obligation to represent the school interests of our community and the people that elected us and the partners that we have in our local law enforcement. Thank you.
So I have a question on what you just said. At one point you said this bill is specifically about federal funding for SROs, but then you very quickly said also in 5A it says any funding.
It says federal funds prohibition notwithstanding, et cetera, you can read it. Any other provision, no federal funds may be appropriated or used for hiring, maintaining, or training sworn law enforcement officers to be used or employed in elementary, secondary, preschools, or programs based in elementary or secondary schools in any capacity.
Yes, no federal funds
Yes,
for
no federal
law
funds.
enforcement officers.
For law
For
enforcement.
any law enforcement officers to be used or employed for any
Yes,
provision.
for law enforcement officers. It's not about federal funding other than SROs.
No federal funds may be used for law enforcement, yes.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
That's an irrelevant data point, frankly. As Liz rightly pointed out, I mean,
I was trying to clarify.
let's go back to why we have SROs. We're 2 towns away from Sandy Hook. A previous board, previous to all of us, decided they were a good idea. And I tend to agree they still are. Funding aside, CABE has asked us, and I know we love CABE, has asked us to come out with a position and said, if you support your SROs, write a letter. That's why we're here. So what happens in Bridgeport? It's irrelevant to me. What happens in Waterbury? It's irrelevant to me. What happens in Ridgefield is what's important. I, for one, value the SROs, and I would like to see us write a position paper and submit that to our elected representative that tells our position on this. So it's a very binary choice. Do we support our SROs or do we not? And if we don't, we have to have a whole different conversation.
I feel that making a statement like that, because I really do feel that there is some validity in this bill for other communities. It may not be from this community.
Again,
It's
That's
not our
not
bill, it doesn't
Ridgefield.
matter. If
We're
I-
talking about our town.
Excuse me, let Kathleen has the floor,
Go ahead.
please. Thank you.
Therefore, I feel that I think it came from a very real reason, and there are really important data points in other communities in our country that very clearly state that law enforcement is not, it does not serve all children's needs.
That may be, we're talking about Ridgefield. What we do in this room has nothing to do with those towns, We have no jurisdiction, no voting ability, no funding ability, nothing. We're talking about our SROs here in Ridgefield and our thoughts on them. Do we support them, yes or no?
And what do your constituents feel, Kathleen? Because we're not here just to represent how we feel.
Oh, I understand. I'm sure that there's, people feel like I do, people feel like you do, I'm sure it's.
How do you
valid.
feel? Do we need to defund our SROs and kick them out of our
Sean,
schools?
Sean.
I don't think that's what this is about. I'm not saying
Not
that.
about that at all.
Ken.
And then, to your point of what happens in Bridgeport doesn't affect us, what happens in Hartford doesn't affect us.
No, it was the reverse. What happens here doesn't impact them. It was the reverse. Our feelings about our SROs has nothing to do with Bridgeport's Board of Ed and how they deal with their SROs, and whether this applies to them or not. Local decisions need to be taken locally. Cade has asked us if we support our
Honestly,
SROs, take a position and write it down. Can we do that?
Sean, Ken's got the floor now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I was gonna say, so this doesn't affect our schools.
You mischaracterized what I said.
Sean.
No, I'm just saying this particular, that we're talking about this right now.
I disagree with you, but you mischaracterized what I said to start with, which is why I corrected the record.
I'm not
But
mischaracterizing
no,
anything.
this is a nationwide
understand.
policy.
But again, what happens outside of Ridgefield, how is that
Ken,
affecting Ridgefield?
simple binary question. Do you support our SROs or not?
Separate
That's what this
conversation.
is, that's what this discussion is about.
No, this discussion is
Jason?
very specific. I'm reading the minutes. This discussion is about this.
What
piece
did
of
Kate-
legislation.
Sean, just one moment, please. Let Ken speak, please, one person at a time.
So I absolutely agree. Personally, I support our SROs. I think they do a wonderful
Awesome.
job in partnership with all of the other
I agree with
services that are going on. That's separate from us discussing this
disagree.
particular bill. Okay, but it is. That's back to your binary choice.
Mhm.
This is a piece of legislation that does not affect our district.
So do you believe that we should take a public stance as an elected Board of Ed who supports Ridgefield SROs and publicly state that as our duty to our schools to protect the local decision-making that is associated with that? Just because we don't get federal funding today doesn't mean a year from now we won't, or 3 years from now we won't.
Let
There's a reason why.
me read
Excuse
the
me,
ask
President.
from Cade, because they were very clear. August 18th. If your district has an SRO, please let U.S. Senator Murphy know the positive way their presence is guiding your district. That's the ask. I'm asking that we take that action.
Rachel.
So, I would like to make a motion this evening, but before I do that, I want to explain why and the backstory to that. I'd like us to show support for our RSOs and other practitioners across our schools, psychologists, counselors, and social workers. In the board retreat, I did bring up the advocacy highlight that was sent out from Cade on August 18th, 2020. And yes, it did reference, it says U.S. Senator Chris Murphy has filed legislation on prohibiting school resource officer funding. That many school districts have expressed concerns on this proposal as they have long-standing memorandum of understandings, MOUs, with local police departments, and those understandings specifically detail the many supportive ways the school resource officers, RSOs, contribute to a positive school climate. If your district has an RSO, please let U.S. Senator Murphy know the positive way their presence is guiding your district. I think we have an opportunity here to help educate. And I think that's what we could do. We could help educate other districts on how it's working for Ridgefield. There could be an inequality in funding, and that could be where this came from. However, I think we need to educate our legislators on what our school systems need, and I believe that that is a balance. A school psychologist or a social worker or a guidance counselor, I don't feel can do the job of an RSO and vice versa. So I feel by taking a positive outlet here, we could write to him. And what I would do is, and this is a suggestion to the board, is to include the letter here from Dr. De Silva. because I believe that this is very bipartisan. I believe that this is for the safety, the health of our students. And again, we would be educating our legislators about something that goes on in our district. They're not here, we are. So I think that's what we should do this evening.
Rachel, Mayor, I respectfully feel that our senator understands completely how important psychologists, social workers, and other mental health counselors are to all students, not just those who have the funds in their communities to have them in their schools, in addition to an SRO. I feel he knows that that is the purpose of this bill, is that the federal money is not just for guns and badges, that it goes to helping students at the root of the trauma that is created for them. So I don't think he needs to be educated in that. I think that is at the heart of this bill.
Ms. Holtz, the letter goes to him, but it also goes to the rest of the people that vote on the bill, which may not be as educated. So in that, and do you really believe that our SROs just provide guns and badges to our school community and to Ridgefield?
I'm not saying always.
You just said that, I would like clarification.
I said within,
Guns and badges, that's what they do for us.
well, I'm saying within the community. I'm not saying Ridgefield. I was talking about it holistically.
Can we keep it to Ridgefield, because that's our concern and the only thing we have purview over?
John,
Great, in that instance, first of all, the bill here has been read twice and referred to committee. There's no current action on this bill. That's one thing. We don't get federal funding for our SROs here in Ridgefield, so this bill has nothing to do with us here in Ridgefield. That's another thing. This bill does point out significant findings, which may or may not be accurate. However, if they are not accurate, I would want to see data that supports their inaccuracy before I go any further than supporting my SROs with our budget. And that's as far as I need to go with their support.
Can I just ask that, we get federal funding for anything?
John, can I speak to, besides Title I?
Title I is federal though, right?
Pardon me?
Title I is federal funding?
Yes.
Most of our grants are federal.
Most of our
grants,
grants
they're
are
passed
Title
through the
II
state. Correct.
is also federal.
IDEA.
IDEA is federal. I believe our Title III, our EL, is federal.
Right. We definitely have other funds that we do receive that are federal dollars.
And
Mostly
those
grants.
are funds, those are earmarked for something, like it's a grant that's written for a specific purpose, we receive those
Right,
funds. So
they're
not
targeted towards a particular reason.
So they couldn't be used for something else, like SROs in schools or psychologists, in other words, like it's not
Well,
tied back to.
they could be used for staffing, for sure, not necessarily an SRO, but if, let's say you were in a Title I school and you needed supports for, behavioral, emotional challenges, you could use that funding to hire a psychologist.
So in section 5A, if this gets passed into law, it absolutely affects Ridgefield because you no longer have that freedom because no federal funds, doesn't matter what they are, no federal funds may be appropriated or used, blah, 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 I guess.
For law enforcement.
For law
For
enforcement.
law enforcement.
Stop. Put that in before the blah, 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 please.
It gives it greater flexibility, you no longer get to make the decision. So, no federal funds. So not one penny of those federal funds could be used if you wanted another SRO in Ridgefield, which whether we do or not is not on the table. It's that this limits your ability for flexibility on a local level to make that decision. And every other school district, which we're not talking about, but we're talking about Ridgefield. And we cannot anticipate the impact of this bill that I would say is vaguely written and has data that's questionable and not sourced either way, whether you believe it or not. This limits that ability for a local board of ed at every single community, including Ridgefield, to make that call. It takes away the local autonomy of Dr. Silva, and it takes away the local autonomy of this board with that 5A section. So, full stop, this does impact Ridgefield. And to say that it doesn't, just because it doesn't right now, is a foolish stance for any legislative body.
You can say it doesn't right now and without saying it may not in the future.
Once it's
Those
passed
two
into
things are
law.
not mutually exclusive.
Again, this is really simple. We have SROs because the previous board thought we needed them.
Nobody's talking about getting rid of the SROs.
No, hold on. CABE has asked us to tell our senators the positive ways that they've guided our district. Are we going to follow CABE's guidance? Or are we going to discard it? And if we're going to discard it, why?
Okay. But again, I support our SROs.
Good, let's put that in writing.
This
It's
is
a real
that's what
John,
we're
please
discussing
let him
this bill.
speak.
So let's finish
Those are
talking about
possible
this.
action items.
I'm sorry?
It's under possible action item.
Okay, but that's.
Simple, so let's vote to put a letter together, support the SRO, sounds like you're on board, I'm on board, Rachel, sounds like.
Excuse
I
me,
just-
excuse me.
Point of clarification.
Go ahead.
Don, how much of our total budget is coming from federal funds?
300,000-400,000, possibly, more?
Okay, out of 100 million.
So I just wonder whether we actually need to make a written statement about it, because every year we do support the SROs in our budget process. We pay for 2 SROs out of our own budget. I think we heard last February when we had an executive session, we heard about what the SROs are, how long we have had them in district, and through the budgetary process, every year we show our support.
I don't think that's what the ask was, Margaret, the ask was to let our senator know.
And that was CABE said there's an option to do that. The one group that actually did do it that we're aware of is the urban superintendent. So again, we're talking locally, because this bill impacts urban areas potentially in a much different way than it impacts Ridgefield. So I would be that I don't believe that it impacts Ridgefield.
And Liz, I've read 5A again, and my reading understanding of this is that unless the language were to be changed, it can only affect law enforcement money going for law enforcement. It cannot affect money going to Title I or.
There was a point not
That's
long
not what
ago.
I asked. Only some of the funds, hold on, only some of the funds are Title I, some of our DIA, and some of our others. We don't have the breakdown. But this says that if it's one dime, Kathleen, you cannot, Dr. De Silva or this board has no jurisdiction over it anymore to use it for the hiring of a Leo of any kind. And in fact, if you read some of the additional backup of the legislative history, it has even more draconian measures. So it's an irrelevant point. I believe, and I believe that the people I've spoken to in the community believe, that this Board of Ed has jurisdiction over our dollars, and we hire a superintendent to manage the operations of those dollars, not Washington, D.C. This is a local politician who is supposed to be representing Connecticut, and we are a Connecticut school district who has a strong relationship with SROs, and we're asking for a statement from this board that says absolutely publicly that we support that relationship and that it's important for our community. That's it. And if you don't believe that, because all they provide is quote-unquote guns and badges, not critical partnerships, support for our security, support for our relationships, support at our events. We even mentioned them today. But all they provide are guns and badges, so that's not necessary. I disagree with you wholeheartedly, Ms. Holtz, and I hope that you will reflect on that.
Well, you know what, I think you took that out of context. I was talking as it was being stated in the bill.
There's nothing about guns or
Well,
badges in here.
Okay, I was.
That's how I heard it.
But I also read what Dr. De Silva said and how they are partners with our community mental health practitioners in the schools. So I think within each district, they provide different services.
Sure,
To
and I don't
tell you the truth,
disagree
I
with you.
don't know all the services.
But the
that-
bill takes away all ability to decide how that happens if federal funds are involved even in 10 cents worth. So taking that local decision-making away.
But it doesn't
To be fair, it
take
does
away the
not.
local decision-making, because as
Yeah.
Margaret pointed out, and as the boards have done every year since we've had SROs, we fully funded SROs because we think they're important to our district.
Or now.
And
But
we
it doesn't matter, we're saying 400,000 out of $100 million. And quite frankly, I don't see that.
And the bill
that
says if
going
it's
up.
10 cents, you're out of luck. So the quantity is irrelevant,
It's absolutely not irrelevant.
but it is.
It's not at all.
The bill-
And federal funds will
Okay.
almost always come
I'd
with
like-
some kind of stipulation.
I'd like to make a motion that we put together a formal board document to provide to our state senator that we support our SROs. I'd like to make a
Do we have
motion.
a second?
Second.
Further discussion?
I think it's taking what should be a board decision, and it's a bipartisan board decision, and it's politicizing.
I think
I
Kate
think this
asked
is
us to
being
take action,
displayed
and
how
they did that for a
Kate
reason.
asked us if
Kate's
we
input.
think that if we think that that's applicable to our district, this is an option for
No.
us to take action.
They said if your district has an SRO, please let Senator Murphy know the positive way their presence is guiding your district. It doesn't say if.
Okay,
It says,
if you can interpret.
if you have an SRO, please write a
If
letter.
you can interpret language in the bill, then we can interpret language in a letter from a.
I read it to you
from a
once,
governing
it's
body.
really clear. The bill is a little fuzzier.
Agreed.
If you can interpret this different, I'm all ears.
Most bills completely are.
I get it, but this one sentence is pretty clear. If you can interpret it differently, I'd love to hear that.
All right, Jonathan, slide his hand up.
Just two things. In our retreat a few weeks ago, two things to remember were, don't take politics into the boardroom and keep focused on the job at hand. This is bringing, in my mind, this is bringing politics where it does not belong, and this is not our job. Our job is taking care of the students here. This is taking us off topic.
Why do you keep making
Jonathan,
the
I would respectfully disagree with you in that our job is also to represent the community and the future of our school district, not just right now. We are responsible for the strategic direction of the school district, and chipping away at the local autonomy of the Ridgefield schools has been a political theme, and this is a bill where puts it in action. That federal departments now decide where we can put a dollar. And that to me is an egregious thing. We've been asked by our Board of Education group to support our SROs. We've stated that we support our SROs. Many people in this room, not everybody, some of us don't dismiss their contribution. I, for one, believe that Ridgefield's a safer place because of it, and that our students are better off because of it. And we've got federal legislation that is not bipartisan, unfortunately, or fortunately, that is partisan, that's saying we have no more choice on that matter. And that is painting a broad brush across every school district in the United States as being the same. And I'd say Ridgefield is darn different, and we should stand up and say that. And we believe that our autonomy is important to us.
And we absolutely do that every year when we fund our SROs.
That's not what
Federal funds
Then why not say it?
We're gonna find
Then why not
the
say it out
funds.
loud? We support our SROs. Why not? If we do it anyway, why not just put it in the
Two separate discussions. The bill is separate from our support of our SROs.
I voted every year for a budget and supported the SRO inclusion in that budget. And I will continue to do so if they continue to do the work that they have, from what I can tell from the people in the schools, have provided.
Super, so let's tell Senator Murphy how we feel about
I
it.
don't think it's
I'll
applicable.
decline.
Katie thinks it was applicable. Why would they have asked us to take action?
There's a motion on the table?
I was just gonna say,
Yep.
motion on the table, any other discussion before we take a vote?
I just think we should write the letter, guys. We could word it, we could phrase it from the stance. Again, the RSO presence, how it positively impacts our district in Ridgefield, as well as the positive impact of other practitioners, school psychologists, counselors, and social workers, as they all work together in providing a safe and healthy environment for our children. I really think we could take this in a positive light, and I think our emotions are getting the best of us right now, but I really think it goes back to the kids, goes back to their safety, their health. I agree, it's horrible that politics comes into here. I agree with you, Jonathan. But then we do get these advocacy highlights. And in this advocacy highlight, it does say, guys, if your district has an RSO, please let Senator Murphy know the positive way their presence is guiding your district. We're not telling him not to go forth with the bill. We're giving him information. We're educating him on how it's working here in Ridgefield.
I would just like to, before we vote, I would just like to say that I absolutely support Officer Luis, Officer Daly, Officer Julio. I think they're wonderful additions to our schools. I know how much those kids cherish the partnership that they have when those SROs are in the school. I know the teachers as well and the administration. I think we also have a wonderful partnership with the entire police force. I know that Dr. De Silva meets often with the chief Kreitz, and even before that, Chief Roche. We've had a wonderful partnership and relationship. I don't know that that necessarily necessitates us writing a letter. So I just wanted to make sure that I was on the record saying that.
I concur, Margaret. I mean, I feel very strongly that we continue to fund them in our budget. We continue to support them. But I think at this point, I don't think it's necessary to send a letter, because I think in this highly politicized atmosphere, it really does not send the right message.
I disagree. I think it sends the absolutely right message,
Well,
that we are above the fray and we support our SROs publicly, privately, in this room, and for the people that aren't listening. And we take a stand to protect our community, overall, all of our community.
But I
The
don't
students, the Leos, and everybody else in it.
I do not think, I agree, we support the protection, but I don't think writing a letter will change the protection of
Well,
our
that's,
community.
that's grassroots effort,
That's
so
what we
nobody
do.
can ever do
Well,
change.
and quite frankly, rising above the fray would be not inserting ourselves into the fray.
Well, this is
So
the fray.
that is the fray.
Our Connecticut senator has written this and said that we no longer get the approval.
Which is
During the
fine,
break.
and if he was here, we could have this discussion with him. Is
That's
this,
invited.
has this gone into?
Ken, why do you think CAVE asked us to take action? Just, that's a rhetorical question, but.
Honestly, I don't think CAVE asked us to take action. I think CAVE asked Bridgeport and Hartford and New Haven and the schools that are gonna be affected by this.
That's
to take
weird,
action.
because I got the email, I know you got the email, you got the email.
I did.
Why
I
did we
see a
get this
federal
email
bill.
if it went to Bridgeport and other jurisdictions?
We went to all jurisdictions.
Well, that's my
And it
point.
affects all
So why did CAVE ask us to take action?
What was the date on that?
August 18th, which is right about the time that Liz first asked for this to be on the agenda.
Thank you.
I think it coincided exactly with the time. Correctly?
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Are we ready to take a vote? So I believe the motion made by Sean and seconded by Rachel was about writing a letter to Senator Murphy regarding the bill and showing support for local SROs, to paraphrase. Would that be accurate? Okay. All those in favor of writing a letter, please raise your hand. 3. All those opposed, please raise your hand. All those abstaining, please raise your hand. Okay, the motion does not carry. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, the 2021-22 school calendar. I believe the last time we spoke about this was back in June 22nd. And at that point, we presented 3 different options for the calendar, and we discussed those and chose one to kind of move with it.
So yes, back in June, we had 3 calendars. I had received feedback from Board of Education members. Ms. Vogel actually had sent me another calendar from another district. I was asked by board members to collect feedback from our teacher representatives, which I did with Mr. Ruland, and he reached out to the teacher groups, and we landed on this schedule. So there are some pieces of this schedule that we maintained, even though part of the discussion was the possibility of having both Columbus Day on October 11th and Veterans Day being in school days, giving kids an opportunity to learn about those 2 holidays while they're in school. We did not make the adjustment this year. A big part of it, quite frankly, was just timing in terms of when the calendar needed to be here and us addressing the topic and giving folks more of an opportunity to weigh in, but also because I did not have access, they're not available to many of the regional calendars, so I did not know how it was going to impact staffing in terms of their own children being home and the other pieces. So that's one of the reasons that you don't see that shift here. Philosophically, I do believe that children would benefit from being in school and learning the history about both of these dates, but in this calendar, we've left it as is. One of the other changes that you'll notice is the February break. So that is new to Ridgefield. We were able to do that by keeping the end of the year where we originally had it mid-June, by shifting the school year a little bit earlier for teachers in terms of their professional learning days and then for kids. So you'll notice that students actually have a little bit over a week in February. So they begin on February 17th is an early dismissal for the PD, and then they have the 18th off for students, although faculty will be in, and then they have the full week off in February there. So that's one notable difference. The other piece, you still have your April break, that's there, your December break. Another piece that I wanted to mention just in relation to this calendar is the State Board of Education. I don't know if they've officially approved yet, you may know.
I think November was what they
Okay.
said.
But they do have on the table, and the commissioner, and I'll actually see the commissioner this Friday, but did put a motion on the table, and it looks like it will come to fruition to have snow days be allowed as remote learning days. That said, you all know the community better than I do. If power is out, then it may not work for us. So that's one of the variables that is still out there, but it does look like that's going to be a possibility, and actually a possibility into the future. So it's not about just 1 year or a couple of years. It looks like that might be something that's going to hold tighter than just a couple of years. So we still have 181 days for children and 187 days for faculty.
we can make a motion and then do discussion, because this is our second read, so this would be an action item, so.
I move that the Board of Education approve the 2021-22 school calendar as presented.
Do I have a second? Jonathan? Okay, any comments?
I have two questions, and they're totally not related to one another.
Okay.
With regard to not having snow days, or not needing to have snow days, would there be any discussion around the idea of having one or two for old time's sake for the kids? To get to have that, wake up and see snow and be off for the day?
So I'm not sure that, I think that's actually, if that's a real question, is that a real one?
It is a real one. I know that kids like waking up and seeing that snow and knowing that they're off for one, they don't like it 9 times in a year and going to school to the end of June.
I'm not sure that we, I suppose it could be the power outage day that we can. I suppose that could be, once we know for sure whether or not this is going through, we can bring it back to the board and the board can make a decision. Ultimately, it is the board's decision whether or not we're going to have those remote days or not. You could theoretically say you want us to make them up in June. I'm giving you that information that's been given to us so far. And then ultimately, you know, if this board doesn't feel like the remote experience is one that you believe would benefit our students, I think that's a good discussion to have. Would we prefer to have our kids come back in June for the extra days if they're missing? Or, and I think in Ridgefield it's been tricky because the weather does, it looks different for us in this community, and I've already caught wind of that. So, a couple of times. So that might be something that this board wants to discuss, and depending upon what you value most, you know, I'm here to support that.
That was actually part of the conference call last week where I heard about this becoming a possibility that actually was brought up, that some people, it's kind of like, you know, the wonder of waking up and having a snow day. So
Well, the wonder is one piece, but whether or not the experience that kids are getting in the remote, I mean, you know, to be frank, when I listened to earlier board meetings before I arrived here, there was a lot of discussion around screen time. Because I think there were Chromebooks that we were looking to purchase, and there was, you know, whether or not we want to purchase them. Do we want kids on these Chromebooks as long as they, you know, obviously that conversation became null and void, and we want Chromebooks beyond Chromebooks, and kids are on a screen all day. But that may be something that this board wants to come back to and say, you know what, that's not something that we value, and we want our kids in school, and that's the end of that. Or maybe there's a limit. You know, after 3, then we add it to the calendar. So I think it's worth a discussion once we know for sure.
The other question was around Columbus Day. Was there any discussion around, some other districts have sort of referring to it in different manners, either Indigenous Peoples Day, Italian American Heritage Day, a few different ways people have gone with it. Has there been discussion in this
So
district?
I did receive a few emails, I think after that first meeting in June, around changing it to, you know, and there's been a lot of discussion in other communities, whether it's exactly which Indigenous people, Italian American. Again, I think that's a bigger, broader discussion. It's a philosophical one, and perhaps even just one that comes with perspective. Just the timing, in terms of where, to be fair, where I am and opening schools, it just wasn't something that I was going to press on with in terms of priorities. But certainly, if this is something that the Board of Education would like to discuss further, then I'll be glad to jump in and get some feedback, and certainly come to the table with what my recommendation would be.
Yeah, and I would argue that's a little bit politicized too. I mean, really, if we're gonna say politics are not okay here, I would say that one is probably one that probably brings up some political arguments as well.
Oh, I didn't know there was a party behind that.
Jonathan, I love your thinking about, you know, having the snow day, but having lived in Ridgefield since the early 90s, I don't know that bad snowstorms, we lose internet, we need, some community in part of the town loses it, so I can't imagine that we're confident that we're gonna have all our infrastructure after all of our snowstorms.
They'll get their snow days, yeah.
Yeah, right. They'll probably get their snow day. I mean, we experienced that obviously with Veterans Park earlier in Central Office, actually earlier this month, where we had to provide a remote learning experience for those students, and we had to shift the schedule. And you know, we could be creative just like we were then and figure it out. But again, I think this board will have to decide what they value the most and what the community does, and I'm at your discretion when it comes to that. So.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Is there any other discussion specifically about the calendar? Let's move to a vote. All those in favor of approving the 2021-22 school calendar as presented, please raise your hand. All right, that's all of us. It's 8. Thank you. Okay, on to policies. This is the second read for 3 of our policies. There was a 4th policy, as you know, that was discussed at the last meeting, and that one has gone back, that will go back to the policy committee for discussion, and that's one. But these are the 3 that I believe we decided to move forward for second read. The first one is the food service program. Do I have a motion regarding this policy?
I move that the Board of Education approve policy 3542, food service program.
Do I have a second? Nora? Okay. Any comments or questions regarding this policy? All right, let's move to a vote. All those in favor of approving policy 3542, please raise your hand. That's 8. Okay, thank you. That one passes. Do I have another motion for 4118?
I move that the Board of Education approve policy 4118.231, employee alcohol, tobacco, and drug use.
Do I have a second? Nora? Okay. Any comments or questions on this one? All right, let's move to a vote. All those in favor of approving policy 4118.231, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 8. Thank you. And the last.
I move that the Board of Education approve policy 5141.25, food allergies, glycogen storage disease, and diabetes.
Do I have a second? Jonathan? Okay. Any comments or questions on this one? All right, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of approving policy 5141.25, please raise your hand. That's 8 again. All right, great, thank you.
Margaret, there was one in the last meeting, the mask policy that was going in for a rewrite. Do we-
Yeah, that's what I referenced at the beginning. I'm sorry, yeah, exactly. And that's going back to policy committee too.
Okay.
Before it comes back to us. Okay, next item on our agenda is correspondence to the board. Our new secretary, Rachel, will be reading the public comment.
I don't believe we have any public comment.
All right.
I will check one more time. No.
Okay, thank you. And then correspondence report.
We received 3 emails since our last Board of Education meeting. 1 email sharing social distancing strategies, and 2 emails were in regard to the district's decision on fans/spectators at the RHS Girls Volleyball Games. One of those emails represented multiple families.
Thank you. Okay, the next agenda item. Do I have a motion regarding our executive session?
I move that the Board of Education convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing school security strategies and inviting Dr. De Silva, Dorn Norton, and Dave Malzewski into the session.
Dr. Hanaway.
Oh, and Dr. Hanaway.
Okay, do I have a second? Kathleen? Okay, all those in favor of convening an executive session, please raise your hand. Okay, that's all of us. All right, thank you. We will say goodbye to those who are not going to be a part of the executive session. Thank you for joining us tonight.